The silence in the grand Ashford ballroom was so thick you could cut it with a knife. 600 pairs of eyes fixed on the man standing before the Steinway grand piano. His hands trembled as they hovered over the ivory keys. The crystal chandeliers above cast a golden glow across the room, illuminating designer gowns worth more than most people's homes, diamond necklaces that could fund a small country, and faces frozen in a mixture of curiosity and disdain. DeShawn Rivers stood there, his borrowed vest slightly too large, his shoes scuffed and worn, completely out of place among America's wealthiest elite. Just minutes ago, he'd been washing dishes in the kitchen below. Now he was center stage at the most exclusive charity gala of the year. Behind him, Victoria Ashford stood with her arms crossed, a cruel smile playing at her lips. She'd just introduced him to the crowd in the most humiliating way possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," she'd said, her voice dripping with mockery, "our regular pianist had an unfortunate accident. So tonight, for your entertainment, our dishwasher will play for us." The laughter that followed had cut through him like shattered glass. DeShawn's fingers shook. His right hand ached with phantom pains from an injury years old. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. 8 years. It had been 8 years since he'd played piano in front of anyone. 8 years since he'd lost everything. 8 years since the fire. One woman in the front row whispered loudly to her companion, "This is absurd. Victoria's turned this gala into a circus." A man in a tuxedo worth more than DeShawn had earned in the past year checked his watch impatiently. The silence stretched on. Seconds felt like hours. DeShawn closed his eyes. And in that moment, everything else fell away. The judging faces, Victoria's cruelty, the impossibility of his situation. All of it faded into the background as one thought crystallized in his mind. This wasn't just about him anymore. His fingers descended toward the keys. But to understand how he got here, to understand what was about to happen, we need to go back. Back 3 days. Back to where this impossible story truly began. 3 days earlier, DeShawn Rivers woke up to the sound of rain hammering against the tarp above his head. He opened his eyes to see the underside of the Morrison Street Bridge, the same view he'd woken up to for the past 2 years. The concrete was cold and unforgiving. His sleeping bag, worn thin from use, did little to keep out the chill of the early morning air. Around him, a small community of others who'd fallen through society's cracks stirred slowly awake. At 28 years old, DeShawn looked older. The streets had a way of aging you. His once bright eyes had grown guarded. His shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with memories he couldn't escape. He rolled up his sleeping bag with practiced efficiency, stuffed it into a weathered backpack, and made his way up the embankment to street level. The city was just beginning to wake. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Early morning joggers, oblivious in their expensive athletic gear and noise-canceling headphones, ran by without seeing him. DeShawn had learned years ago that to most people, the homeless were invisible. He walked 12 blocks to the old St. Matthew's Church. The building had been abandoned for 5 years. Its congregation dissolved its doors, locked to official visitors. But DeShawn knew about the side entrance where the lock had broken years ago. He slipped inside. The church smelled of dust and decay, but to DeShawn, it was sanctuary. And there in the corner of what had once been the fellowship hall sat his reason for coming here every morning. An upright piano, old and battered, several keys stuck or missing, but still functional. Still capable of producing sound. Still capable of music. DeShawn approached it the way someone might approach a long-lost friend they'd betrayed. with hesitation, with longing, with grief. He sat on the bench, his hands hovering over the keys, just as they would hover 3 days later in front of 600 judging eyes. But here in this abandoned church with no one watching, he allowed himself to touch them. The sound that emerged was imperfect. The piano was desperately out of tune. But to DeShawn, it was everything. His fingers moved across the keys, playing scales, exercises, fragments of melodies from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. His right hand cramped after a few minutes, the old injury from the fire making itself known, but he pushed through the pain. He always pushed through the pain. "You're getting better." DeShawn's hands froze. He turned to see Father Thomas standing in the doorway. The old priest wasn't really a father anymore, hadn't been since the church closed, but DeShawn still thought of him that way. Father Thomas was 82, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering, and hands gnarled with arthritis. "Didn't mean to startle you, Father," Thomas said, shuffling forward. "I heard you playing from outside." "That Chopin etude wasn't it," DeShawn nodded. "Attempting it anyway." Father Thomas lowered himself onto a folding chair nearby, his joints protesting audibly. "You know," he said, his voice carrying the rasp of age, "I've been listening to you play here for almost 2 years now. Every morning you come here, every morning you play. And every morning I'm reminded that God gives us gifts for a reason. Sometimes God takes away more than he gives," DeShawn said quietly. "Or sometimes," Father Thomas replied, "He's waiting for us to be ready to use those gifts again." DeShawn turned back to the piano. "I'm not that person anymore, Father. That person died in a fire 10 years ago. The person who could play Chopin at 8 years old. The prodigy who got a full scholarship to Juilliard at 17. That person." DeShawn's jaw tightened. "How do you know about that? I may be old, but I'm not senile. I still read. I remember. I saw your picture in the paper years ago. Detroit's musical miracle, they called you. And then you disappeared." For a long moment, DeShawn said nothing. Then quietly, "That person doesn't exist anymore. Doesn't he?" Father Thomas stood slowly preparing to leave. "I think he's sitting right here playing piano in an abandoned church every morning, running from something, or maybe running toward something. Either way, DeShawn, gifts like yours don't just disappear. They wait. The question is, what are you waiting for?" Father Thomas left his footsteps echoing through the empty church. DeShawn sat alone with the piano, with his memories, with the weight of everything he'd lost. He didn't know it then, but in just a few hours, everything would change. Victoria Ashford would change everything. The Ashford Grand Hotel towered 43 stories above the city, a monument to wealth and excess. Victoria Ashford had built her empire through ruthless business practices and an absolute refusal to show mercy to anyone she considered beneath her, which in her view was nearly everyone. DeShawn had been working in the hotel's kitchen for 3 months. It was under-the-table work, cash paid daily, the kind of job that didn't ask questions about addresses or social security numbers. He washed dishes from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning, 6 days a week. The pay was terrible, but it was something. And every dollar went into an envelope he kept hidden in his sleeping bag. An envelope marked Zara. On this particular evening, DeShawn was finishing his shift early. The kitchen manager had told him they were closing down early to prepare for the weekend's big event, the annual Ashford Charity Gala. As he was leaving, taking the service elevator down from the kitchen level, the elevator malfunctioned, stopping on the 3rd floor, the floor that housed the grand ballroom. The doors opened, and DeShawn found himself staring into an enormous space. The ballroom was empty, being prepared for the gala. But there in the center of the raised stage, illuminated by a single spotlight, stood the most beautiful piano DeShawn had ever seen. A Steinway Model D concert grand, 9 feet of perfection, its black lacquer surface gleaming like still water under moonlight. DeShawn knew he should just take the stairs down and leave. Knew he shouldn't be here. But his feet moved of their own accord, drawn to the instrument like metal to a magnet. The ballroom was empty, just him and the piano. Surely just a few seconds wouldn't hurt. Just to touch the keys. Just to feel what a real piano felt like again after years of practicing on that broken-down upright. He climbed the steps to the stage, approached the piano, sat down on the bench, adjusting it slightly. His hands trembled as they touched the keys, and then he began to play. It was Debussy Clair de Lune, the piece his mother had loved most, the piece she'd asked him to play for her the night before she died. His fingers moved across the keys, and the sound that emerged was transcendent. This piano was perfect. Every note clear and pure. Every tone exactly as it should be. DeShawn lost himself in the music. For those few minutes, he wasn't homeless. He wasn't washing dishes for cash. He wasn't carrying the weight of 10 years of loss and pain. He was just a musician playing a beautiful piece on a beautiful instrument. He didn't hear the ballroom doors open. Didn't hear the click of expensive heels on marble floor. Didn't notice he had an audience until the music stopped and a voice cold as winter frost cut through the silence. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" DeShawn's hands froze. He turned to see a woman standing at the edge of the stage. She was in her mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than a car. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her face, which might have been beautiful once, was twisted in an expression of absolute fury. Victoria Ashford. DeShawn stood quickly, nearly knocking over the bench. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just what? Breaking into my ballroom, touching my piano with your filthy hands." "No, ma'am. I work here, in the kitchen. The elevator stopped on this floor, and you're the dishwasher." It wasn't a question. Victoria looked him up and down, her lip curling in disgust. "And you thought you'd play piano? You thought you could just waltz in here and put your dirty fingers all over a $300,000 instrument?" DeShawn's heart hammered in his chest. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I used to play, and I used to play." Victoria's laugh was harsh. "People like you don't used to play on pianos like this. This instrument has been played by some of the greatest musicians in the world, and you think you have the right to touch it." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling security. You're not only fired, you're going to be arrested for trespassing." "Please," DeShawn said, hating the desperation in his voice, but unable to stop it. "Please don't. I need this job. My sister, she's sick, and I don't care about your sob story," Victoria said, her finger hovering over her phone. "People like you are always full of excuses, always looking for handouts. Well, not from me. Security will escort you out, and if I ever see you near my hotel again, I'll have you arrested." She made the call. 2 security guards arrived within minutes. As they grabbed DeShawn's arms to lead him out, Victoria called after him. "And consider yourself lucky, I'm not pressing charges. Though perhaps I should just to teach you a lesson about knowing your place." DeShawn was thrown out through the service entrance, landing hard on the wet pavement of the alley behind the hotel. The rain had started again. He sat there for a long moment, his mind reeling. He'd just lost his only source of income. The envelope for Zara would stay empty. And all because he'd given in to a moment of weakness, touched something beautiful, reached for something he had no right to reach for anymore. DeShawn pulled himself to his feet and started walking back toward the bridge, back to his tarp and his thin sleeping bag, back to invisibility. He didn't know that Victoria Ashford was still standing in the ballroom staring at the piano with an expression that was no longer quite so certain. Because despite her cruelty, despite her prejudice and her rage, she couldn't deny what her ears had heard. That dishwasher could play, really play, and Victoria Ashford never let a potentially useful tool go to waste. 2 days passed. 2 days of DeShawn trying to find other work coming up empty at every turn. 2 days of the envelope for Zara staying empty. 2 days of fear growing in his chest like a living thing. He'd called the group home where Zara was staying. The woman who answered Mrs. Chen had been sympathetic but firm. DeShawn, honey, Zara needs that surgery. The doctors are saying within the next 3 months or... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Zara had been born with a congenital heart defect. For years, their mother had scraped together enough money for treatments, for medications, for the care that kept Zara alive. But the fire had taken their mother. And social services had taken Zara, placed her in foster care when DeShawn, homeless and injured, couldn't provide for her. The surgery she needed cost $60,000. An impossible amount. But DeShawn had been trying, working every job he could find, saving every penny. He was up to $4,216, $55,784 to go. At this rate, he'd never make it in time. On the 3rd day, DeShawn returned to the Ashford Grand Hotel. Not to work, he knew he was fired, but the hotel had a service entrance where they put out leftover food at the end of the night. DeShawn had learned that if he waited in the alley around 2 in the morning, sometimes the night cook would leave out a container of something. He was sitting on a crate in the alley, rain dripping from the edge of the dumpster above him, when the service door opened. But it wasn't the night cook. It was Victoria Ashford. She stood in the doorway, backlit by the harsh fluorescent lights of the service corridor, looking down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You," she said. "Come with me. I don't care what you were just doing. I have a proposition for you. You can either sit in this alley feeling sorry for yourself, or you can come inside and listen. Your choice." DeShawn didn't trust her. Every instinct told him to run. But the memory of Mrs. Chen's voice on the phone, the words about Zara needing surgery within 3 months, kept him rooted to the spot. He stood and followed Victoria inside. She led him through the service corridors, up the elevator, and into an office that screamed wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Modern art that probably cost a fortune hung on the walls. Victoria sat behind a desk that looked like it was made from a single piece of marble. She gestured to a chair. DeShawn sat acutely aware of how out of place he was, his damp clothes leaving marks on the expensive upholstery. "I'll be direct," Victoria said. "The annual Ashford Charity Gala is in 2 days. It's the social event of the season. 600 guests. Every person of importance in this city will be there. Billionaires, politicians, celebrities. The event raises millions for various charities." She paused. "And it's a disaster." DeShawn said nothing, unsure where this was going. My pianist Victoria continued, her jaw tight. "Alexander Winters, one of the most sought-after performers in the country, had an accident yesterday. Broke his hand in 3 places. He can't perform. And I absolutely cannot have this gala go forward without a piano performance. It's the centerpiece of the entire evening." Understanding began to dawn. "You want me to play?" "Want" is a strong word, Victoria said coldly. I need someone who can play at a professional level, and I need them in 2 days. Every legitimate pianist I've contacted is either booked or demanding fees I'm not willing to pay. You, on the other hand, are available. And despite my better judgment, I heard you play the other night. You're adequate. Adequate. The word stung, but DeShawn pushed past it. Why would I help you? You had me fired. Threw me out. Victoria leaned back in her chair. Because I'm going to pay you $20,000. The number hit DeShawn like a physical blow. $20,000. It wouldn't cover all of Zara's surgery, but it was nearly a third of the way there. It was more money than he'd seen in years. There are conditions, Victoria said. You will play a 45-minute set. Classical pieces only, I'll provide the list. You will not speak to any of the guests. You will arrive through the service entrance, perform, and leave immediately after. No one needs to know who you are or where you came from. As far as anyone is concerned, you're a professional pianist I hired. Are we clear? $20,000, DeShawn said slowly. Up front, half up front, half after the performance. And if you screw this up, if you embarrass me in front of 600 of the most powerful people in the country, you'll wish I'd just left you in that alley. DeShawn's mind raced. 2 days. He hadn't performed in front of anyone in 8 years. His hand still hurt. He had stage fright so severe that just thinking about playing in front of people made his chest tighten. And Victoria Ashford was possibly the cruelest person he'd ever met. But $20,000. For Zara. I need to see the money, he said, the $10,000 up front, before I agree. Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out an envelope. She counted out $100 bills and placed them on the desk between them. DeShawn stared at the money. More cash than he'd ever seen in his life. Do we have a deal? Victoria asked. DeShawn reached out and took the envelope. Deal. Victoria smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Good. Rehearsal tomorrow night, 9 p.m. in the ballroom. Don't be late. And DeShawn. She said his name like it tasted bad. Don't make me regret this. As DeShawn left the office envelope clutched in his hand, he had the distinct feeling he'd just made a deal with the devil. But for Zara, he'd make 1,000 such deals. He just had to survive 2 days. 2 days to prepare for the performance of his life. 2 days before everything would change forever. The next morning, DeShawn did something he hadn't been able to do in months. He went to see his sister. Zara lived at the Riverside Group Home, a facility for teenagers in foster care. It was a clean place, well-run, but institutional in the way all such places are. The walls were painted cheerful colors that couldn't quite hide the underlying sadness, the sense that everyone here was waiting for a family that might never come. DeShawn had to sign in at the front desk. The woman there, Mrs. Patterson, knew him. She gave him a sympathetic smile. She'll be so happy to see you. She talks about you all the time. He found Zara in the common room, sitting by a window reading a book. At 16, she looked younger, her illness having kept her small and thin. But her eyes, when they saw him, lit up with a joy that made his heart ache. DeShawn. She jumped up, and he caught her in a hug, gentle, because he knew how fragile she was. You came. I didn't think you'd be able to come this week. I'll always come when I can, Z, he said, using the nickname he'd given her when she was a baby. How are you feeling? She pulled back, and he could see the careful way she moved, the slight breathlessness. I'm okay. The doctors say the new medication is helping. Mrs. Chen says you've been calling. They sat together on the worn couch by the window. The afternoon sun streamed through, making Zara's dark hair shine. She looked so much like their mother it sometimes hurt to look at her. I have some good news, DeShawn said, pulling out the envelope with the $10,000. I got a job, a really good paying job. It's going to help with the surgery. Zara's eyes widened. Really? DeShawn? That's amazing. What kind of job? He hesitated. Playing piano. Just one night, but it pays well. The joy on Zara's face transformed into something deeper, more emotional. You're going to play again, really play. It's just one performance, Z. Nothing major. Nothing major? She grabbed his hands. DeShawn, you haven't played in front of anyone since Mom. Her voice caught on the word. Are you sure you're ready? I have to be. For you. No, Zara said firmly with a maturity beyond her years. Not just for me. For you too. And for Mom. She wouldn't want you to give up music forever because of what happened. DeShawn looked away out the window. Every time I think about playing in front of people, I see the fire. I feel the heat. I hear Mom screaming. Zara squeezed his hands tighter. I know. But DeShawn, you got me out. You saved my life. And Mom, in those last moments, you know what she said to me in the hospital before she died? DeShawn looked at his sister, tears threatening. She said, "Take care of your brother. Don't let him lose his music. It's his gift, and the world needs to hear it." That's what she said to Sean. She was dying, and she was worried about your music. The tears came then silent and hot. DeShawn hadn't cried in years. Couldn't allow himself that vulnerability. But here with Zara, he let himself feel the weight of everything he'd been carrying. "I'm scared, Z," he whispered. "I know," she said. "But you're also the bravest person I know. You've survived things that would have broken other people. You've kept going, kept fighting, kept trying to take care of me even when you can barely take care of yourself. This performance, you're going to be amazing, I know it." They sat together for another hour, talking about nothing and everything. About Zara's classes at the group home, about the book she was reading, about memories of their parents, stories they'd told each other 100 times, but needed to hear again. Before he left, Zara hugged him tight. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Promise me you'll play for yourself too. Not just for the money, not just for me, but because it's who you are. Promise me you'll let yourself feel the music again." DeShawn held his sister, feeling how fragile she was, how precious. "I promise." As he walked out of the group home, the sun was setting. Tomorrow night was rehearsal. The night after that was the gala. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to overcome 8 years of fear and trauma. But Zara believed in him. And somewhere he hoped their mother was watching, hoping he'd find his way back to the gift she'd sacrificed so much to nurture. For them, he had to try. He had to be brave. Even if bravery felt impossible. To understand what DeShawn had lost, you have to understand what he'd once been. In Detroit, in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than birdsong, where boarded-up houses lined streets that had seen better decades, there was a small 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days. And in that apartment lived the Rivers family. Marcus Rivers worked at the automotive plant, the same job his father had worked before the industry collapsed. The pay was barely enough, but it was something. Clara Rivers worked 3 jobs cleaning offices at night, waitressing during the day, and taking in laundry on weekends. They were poor by any measure, struggling constantly, but they had something that mattered more than money. They had each other. And they had music. When DeShawn was 5 years old, Clara took him to a community center where volunteers offered free music lessons. She'd noticed how her son would stop and listen whenever he heard music, how his little body would sway, how his fingers would tap rhythms that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his understanding. The volunteer teacher, an elderly woman named Ms. Morrison, who'd once played with symphony orchestras before arthritis ended her career, saw something in DeShawn within the first 5 minutes. This child, she told Clara, has a gift. A real gift. He hears music differently than other children. By age 6, DeShawn was playing pieces that most students didn't attempt until their teenage years. By 7, he was performing at community events, his small hands flying across the keys with a precision and emotion that made grown adults weep. Ms. Morrison took him on as a private student, refusing payment. "I'm not going to charge you for the privilege of teaching a prodigy," she told Clara. "This boy is going to be something special. I can feel it." The apartment was too small for a piano, but Ms. Morrison arranged for DeShawn to practice at the community center every day after school. Clara would pick him up after her waitressing shift, often arriving to find her son still at the piano, completely lost in the music, his young face transformed by concentration and joy. "Baby, it's 8 o'clock, she'd say gently. "We need to go home." "Just one more piece, Mama," he'd plead. "Just one more." She could never say no. She'd sit in the corner of the practice room, watching her son create magic, and think about all the sacrifices she and Marcus made, the meals they skipped, the bills they juggled, the luxuries they never had. And she'd think it's worth it. Every sacrifice is worth it to see him shine like this. When DeShawn was 8, Ms. Morrison entered him in the Detroit Young Musicians Competition. The competition drew talented children from all over the state, many from wealthy families who could afford private lessons and expensive instruments. Clara couldn't afford to buy DeShawn proper concert attire, so she borrowed a suit jacket from a neighbor's son. The pants were too short, the jacket slightly too big, and his shoes were his regular sneakers, cleaned as best as they could be. Backstage, the other parents looked at Clara and DeShawn with barely concealed disdain. One woman dripping in jewelry said loudly to her husband, "I don't know why they let just anyone enter these competitions. It dilutes the quality." 8-year-old DeShawn heard this. He looked up at his mother, saw the hurt flash across her face before she hid it behind a smile. "Mama," he whispered. She knelt down, took his face in her hands. "Baby, listen to me. That woman doesn't know who you are. She doesn't know what you can do. But in a few minutes, everyone in that audience is going to know. You're going to walk out on that stage and you're going to show them what real music sounds like. Can you do that for me, DeShawn?" Nodded, his 8-year-old determination hardening into something steely. When his turn came, he walked out onto the stage of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. The piano was a beautiful Steinway, the best instrument he'd ever played. The audience of over 1,000 people went quiet. He played Chopin's Waltz in C-sharp minor op. 64, num 2. A piece technically beyond what most 8-year-olds could manage. But DeShawn didn't just play the notes. He understood them. He felt them. He made them sing. When the last note faded, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the auditorium erupted. People stood. They cheered. The judges, seasoned musicians, all looked at each other in shock. DeShawn won first place. The prize was a full scholarship to the Detroit Academy of Music, one of the most prestigious music schools in the Midwest. The same woman who'd made the snide comment backstage approached Clara afterward. "Your son," she said stiffly, "is very talented." Clara just smiled. "I know." From age 8 to 17, DeShawn's reputation grew. He performed with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra at age 10. By 12, he was winning national competitions. By 15, he was playing at venues across the country, always returning home to that small apartment to his parents, who'd sacrificed everything to his baby sister Zara, who'd been born when he was 12, and who would fall asleep every night to the sound of him practicing. The family remained poor. The money DeShawn won from competitions and performances went toward Zara's medical bills, toward keeping the family afloat. Clara still worked her 3 jobs. Marcus still worked at the plant. But they had hope now. Hope that DeShawn would get out, would make something of himself, would have the life they'd never had. When DeShawn was 16, he applied to Juilliard, the most prestigious music conservatory in the country. Getting in was nearly impossible, affording it even more so. He was accepted. Full scholarship. They wanted him. Juilliard wanted him. The day the acceptance letter arrived, Clara cried. Marcus cried. Even teenage DeShawn cried. They sat together in their tiny living room, holding each other, hardly believing that this was real. "You're going to be somebody," Marcus told his son. "You're going to show the world what you can do." DeShawn's last year of high school was a whirlwind of final performances, preparations, and dreams about the future. He'd be leaving for New York in the fall, right after he turned 18. Leaving Detroit, leaving his family. But it was toward a future that glowed bright with possibility. Ms. Morrison threw him a small going-away party at the community center that summer. She was 78 by then, her arthritis so bad she could barely play anymore, but she was there beaming with pride. "I told your mother when you were 6, she said, her eyes wet with tears, that you'd be something special. I was right. You're going to make us all proud, DeShawn. I'll make you proud, Ms. Morrison," he promised. "I'll never forget where I came from. I'll never forget who helped me get here." She hugged him. "Just don't forget to enjoy it, child. Don't forget that music is supposed to bring joy. Don't let it become just work." He promised he wouldn't. That promise was made in August. By September, everything would be different. By September, the fire would have taken everything. By September, the prodigy from Detroit would disappear, and in his place would be a broken young man who couldn't bear to touch a piano without seeing flames. But that August, in the days before the fire, DeShawn Rivers stood on the edge of his future, young and talented and full of hope, with a family who loved him and a gift that seemed limitless. He didn't know how precious those days were. Didn't know they'd be the last happy days he'd have for a very long time. Didn't know that sometimes the brightest flames burn out the fastest. The fire started just after midnight on September 3rd. DeShawn was 18 years old. He was supposed to leave for Juilliard in 3 weeks. His bags were already packed, sitting in the corner of his tiny room. He'd been lying awake, too excited to sleep, thinking about New York, about classes, about the future. He smelled the smoke before he heard the alarms. At first he thought maybe someone was cooking, but the smell was wrong. Too acrid, too thick, and it was getting stronger. He got out of bed, opened his bedroom door, and smoke poured in. The hallway was full of it, thick and black, burning his eyes and throat. He could hear screaming from somewhere in the building. Could hear the crackle of flames. "Mom, Dad," he shouted, but the smoke choked his voice. Their bedroom door was across the hall. He stumbled toward it, staying low the way they'd been taught in school fire drills that suddenly seemed absurdly inadequate for this reality. His father was already awake, trying to get Clara up. She'd been sleeping deeply exhausted from a double shift at the diner. Marcus saw DeShawn in the doorway. "Get your sister," he shouted. "Get Zara out." Zara's room was at the end of the hall. The smoke was thinner there. The fire hadn't reached that side of the apartment yet. She was 6 years old, small for her age because of her heart condition, and she was screaming. DeShawn grabbed her, wrapped her in her blanket, held her tight against his chest. "Close your eyes, Z. Close your eyes, and hold on to me." He turned to go back toward the front door, but the hallway was now fully engulfed. Flames licked up the walls. The heat was incredible, like standing in front of an open furnace. Through the smoke and flames, he could see his parents' bedroom door, could hear his father shouting. "Dad!" DeShawn screamed. "Dad, we need to go!" "The window," Marcus shouted back. "Take Zara out the fire escape from your room. Go now. Not without you. Go!" The ceiling in the hallway started to collapse. Burning wood and debris fell, creating a barrier between DeShawn and his parents' room. "No." DeShawn lunged forward, but Zara's weight and the smoke drove him back. She was coughing, struggling to breathe. Her heart condition meant her lungs were weak. She wouldn't last much longer in this smoke. DeShawn made the hardest decision of his life. He turned and ran toward his room, toward the window that led to the fire escape. He kicked out the window screen, climbed out onto the metal fire escape, with Zara still clutched in his arms. The night air was shockingly clear after the smoke. Zara gasped, taking in lungfuls of clean air. "Mama," she cried. "Where's Mama? They're coming," DeShawn said, though he didn't know if it was true. "They're coming, Z. They're right behind us." He started down the fire escape, his bare feet clanging on the metal steps. Behind him, he could hear windows shattering, could hear sirens in the distance, could hear screaming from other apartments. When he reached the ground, he set Zara down on the sidewalk. People were running, evacuating the building. Someone grabbed Zara, wrapped her in a jacket, was asking if she was okay. DeShawn looked up at his apartment window. 3 stories up. Flames poured out of every window now. He couldn't see his parents. "I have to go back," he said. The person holding Zara grabbed his arm. "You can't, son. The whole building's going up. My parents are in there. The firefighters are almost here. They'll get them. You can't." DeShawn pulled away and ran back toward the building entrance. The front door was open, smoke pouring out. He got maybe 3 steps inside before the heat and smoke drove him back, coughing, his eyes streaming. He tried again, and again. Each time he couldn't make it more than a few feet. Firefighters arrived. They physically restrained him, held him back as he fought them, screaming for his parents. The fire raged for 2 hours before they got it under control. By then, the entire building was a blackened shell. DeShawn and Zara sat on the curb, wrapped in blankets, surrounded by paramedics and police and social workers. Zara had been taken to an ambulance, given oxygen. Her heart rate was elevated. They wanted to take her to the hospital. DeShawn wouldn't leave. He sat staring at the building, waiting. Finally, just as the sun was beginning to rise, a firefighter approached. His face was covered in soot. His expression told DeShawn everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. "Son," the firefighter said gently. "Are you DeShawn Rivers?" He nodded, numb. "We found your parents." "I'm so sorry. They didn't make it." The words didn't feel real, couldn't be real. "No," DeShawn said. "No, they were right there. They were right behind me. They said they were coming. The fire moved too fast. It would have been quick. They wouldn't have suffered. It was a lie meant to be kind, but DeShawn knew it was a lie. Fire wasn't quick. Fire was agony. Zara was in the ambulance 20 feet away. They'd sedated her slightly, given her something for her heart. She was asking for her mother. Someone was supposed to tell her. Someone was supposed to explain to a 6-year-old girl that her parents were dead, that someone was DeShawn, in the hospital sitting beside Zara's bed while she slept fitfully. DeShawn looked down at his hands. His right hand was blistered and burned. At some point during the fire, trying to get to his parents, he'd grabbed something hot. He didn't even remember it. But the damage was there, 2nd-degree burns across his palm and fingers. A doctor came in, examined the hand. "We'll treat the burns, but you're likely to have some permanent nerve damage, some loss of dexterity." "Are you right-handed?" DeShawn nodded. "What do you do for work? I'm a pianist," DeShawn said, his voice hollow. "Was a pianist." The doctor's face fell. "I'm sorry." Juilliard. The scholarship. The future that had seemed so bright. All gone. Burned away like the apartment. Like his parents. Like everything. 3 weeks later, Zara was released from the hospital into foster care. DeShawn, homeless and unemployed, couldn't take care of her. Social services was sympathetic, but firm. He could visit, but he couldn't have custody. Not like this. Ms. Morrison came to see him once. She was in a wheelchair by then, her arthritis having progressed. She took his burned hand gently in hers. "Your hand can heal," she said. "It won't be the same, but it can heal enough to play. The music is still in you, DeShawn. Don't let this fire take that, too." But DeShawn barely heard her. Every time he thought about piano, he saw flames, heard his parents screaming, felt the heat on his skin. He told Juilliard he wouldn't be coming. They were understanding, offered to defer his admission. He said no. He couldn't imagine ever playing again. He couldn't imagine anything anymore. For 10 years, he drifted. Worked odd jobs when he could find them. Lost everything. Ended up on the streets. Visited Zara when he could each visit a reminder of what he'd failed to protect, what he'd lost, what he couldn't provide. He stopped playing piano. Stopped being DeShawn Rivers, the prodigy. Became just another invisible homeless person in a city full of them. Until 3 days ago. Until Victoria Ashford's cruel proposition. Until he had to decide whether the man he'd been was truly dead or just sleeping, waiting for a reason to wake up. The years after the fire blurred together into a gray fog of survival and loss. At first, in those immediate months after people tried to help. The community center set up a fund for DeShawn and Zara. Ms. Morrison's former students pooled money. Even Juilliard offered assistance. But pride, grief, and shame made DeShawn push it all away. He took the first job he could find, dishwashing at a diner. His burned hand made it difficult, the hot water and repetitive motion causing pain, but he pushed through. Every penny went to Zara. Foster care provided basics, but she needed more. Medical bills for her heart condition piled up. Medications, doctor visits, emergency room trips when her heart acted up. DeShawn worked 3 jobs that first year. Dishwashing, stocking shelves at night at a grocery store, collecting cans and bottles for the 5-cent deposit. He slept 4 hours a night in a room he rented by the week in a boarding house that smelled of mildew and desperation. He visited Zara every Sunday. She was 7, then 8, then 9. She'd ask about their parents. She'd cry. She'd ask when she could come live with him. "Soon, Z," he'd tell her. "I'm working on it. Soon." But soon never came. Year 2, he lost the dishwashing job when the diner closed. The grocery store cut his hours. The boarding house raised the rent. He started sleeping in his car, an ancient Honda Civic that broke down more often than it ran. Year 3, the car finally died completely. He couldn't afford to fix it. Started sleeping in shelters when he could get a spot on the streets when he couldn't. Zara was 10. She'd been placed with 3 different foster families by then. None of them worked out. She acted out, pushed people away, because the only person she wanted was her brother, and her brother was falling apart. Year 4, DeShawn stopped visiting regularly. It hurt too much to see the disappointment in Zara's eyes. The questions of "when can I come home?" that he couldn't answer. The foster mother called him once, angry, said he was making it harder on Zara by visiting sporadically. Either commit to being in her life or stay away. He tried to stay away. Lasted 2 months before he showed up at the group home begging to see her. She'd hugged him so tight, crying, saying, "Don't leave me again. Please don't leave me again." Year 5. His hand got worse. The nerve damage progressed. Some days he couldn't make a fist. The physical therapy he couldn't afford would have helped, but without insurance, without money, the injury just calcified into permanent disability. He found the abandoned church, found the broken piano, started playing again just for himself in the early mornings when no one was around. It hurt physically, his hand cramping and aching, but it hurt more emotionally. Every note reminded him of his mother, of his father, of the life that had been taken from him. Year 6 and 7 passed in a haze. Different shelters, different streets, different jobs that never lasted. The seasons changed. He got older, harder, more invisible. Other homeless people came and went from the community under the Morrison Street Bridge. Some he got to know. Many disappeared dead, or moved on, or finally found help. DeShawn remained a fixture, the quiet guy who kept to himself and never asked for anything. He met Father Thomas in year 8. The old priest was walking past the bridge, saw DeShawn, and simply sat down next to him. "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world," Father Thomas said. "Just my own weight," DeShawn replied. "That's heavy enough." They talked. DeShawn didn't know why he opened up to this stranger, but something about the old priest's kind eyes, his patient silence made the words come. He told him about the fire, about Zara, about the piano. Father Thomas listened, didn't offer platitudes or false hope, just listened. "There's a piano in my old church," he said finally. "It's not much, but it's there. Church is abandoned now, but I still have the keys. You want to play it, you come by anytime." That's how the morning ritual started. Every day DeShawn would go to the church, would play on the broken piano, would try to find pieces of himself in the music. But pieces weren't enough. He was still homeless, still couldn't provide for Zara, still just surviving, not living. Year 9. Zara's heart condition worsened. The medication she'd been on wasn't working anymore. She needed surgery. $60,000. Might as well have been 60 million. DeShawn increased his visits, started working every job he could find. The desperation returned, sharp and cutting. He was running out of time. Year 10. This year. Just 3 months ago, the doctors gave the timeline. 3 months, maybe 4, before Zara's heart would give out completely. The surgery could fix it, but the surgery cost money DeShawn didn't have and couldn't imagine getting. He'd saved $4,000. It had taken him months. At this rate, Zara would be dead long before he had enough. And then 3 days ago, he'd walked into the Ashford Grand Ballroom, played Victoria's piano, been thrown out, and then been offered $20,000. $20,000 to do the one thing he'd sworn he'd never do again: play in front of people. Face his fears, relive his trauma. But for Zara, he'd face anything. The question was whether he was even capable of it anymore, whether 10 years of running from music had broken him too badly to ever play again. Tomorrow night's rehearsal would tell him. Tomorrow night he'd sit at that piano in that ballroom, and he'd find out if the musician he'd once been still existed. Or if that person had burned up in the fire 10 years ago, just as surely as his parents had. The day before the rehearsal, DeShawn couldn't sit still. He went to the church early before dawn. Father Thomas wasn't there yet. The building was silent, cold, empty. Just him and the piano. He sat at the bench and tried to play. His hands shook so badly the first notes came out wrong, discordant. He tried again. Worse. Panic rose in his chest. What had he been thinking? He couldn't do this. Couldn't play in front of hundreds of people. The fear was too big, too overwhelming. He stood up, paced the empty church. His breath came short and fast. The walls seemed to close in. This was a mistake. He'd tell Victoria no. Return the money. Find another way to help Zara. Except there was no other way. No time. No options. He sat back down at the piano, forced his hands to the keys, tried to slow his breathing, tried to focus. Think about the music, he told himself. Not the audience, not Victoria, not the fear, just the music. He closed his eyes and played a simple piece, a lullaby his mother used to sing to Zara. The notes came easier this time, softer, sadder. He could do this. He had to. Father Thomas arrived an hour later, found DeShawn still at the piano, playing the same piece over and over. "You're going to wear those keys out," the old priest said gently. DeShawn's hands stilled. "I don't know if I can do this." Father Thomas pulled up the folding chair, sat with a grunt of effort. "Tell me what you're afraid of." Everything DeShawn said honestly. "I'm afraid I'll freeze up. Afraid my hand will give out. Afraid I'll look out at all those people and just break. I haven't played for anyone in 10 years. What if I've forgotten how—" "Your fingers remember," Father Thomas said. "I hear you every morning. You haven't forgotten anything. But playing alone is different than performing. When you perform, people are watching, judging, waiting for you to fail." Or Father Thomas countered, "They're waiting to be moved, waiting to experience something beautiful. You're assuming everyone is Victoria Ashford. Most people aren't." DeShawn wanted to believe that, but his experience had taught him otherwise. People were cruel. People judged. People saw a homeless man and assumed he had nothing to offer. "What if I prove them right?" DeShawn asked quietly. "What if I get up there and I'm terrible? What if I embarrass myself, and Victoria doesn't pay me and I can't help Zara, Father?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you know what I think about when I'm afraid? What I think about why I'm doing the thing that scares me? Not the surface reason, the deep reason, the real reason." He leaned forward. "Why are you really doing this, DeShawn? For Zara? For the money? I told you." "No," Father Thomas interrupted. "That's the surface reason." "What's the deep reason?" DeShawn looked at the piano, at his scarred, damaged hands, at the keys that had once been his entire world. "I miss it," he said finally. The words pulled from somewhere deep and painful. "I miss who I was when I played. I miss feeling like I had a purpose. I miss the person my parents raised me to be. I've been running for 10 years from the thing I loved most because it hurt too much. Because every time I played, I remembered what I lost. And now, DeShawn's throat tightened. "Now I think maybe I've been losing more by running. I've been so afraid of the pain that I forgot about the joy. Mom used to say that music was a gift, that it was meant to be shared, and I've been keeping it locked away hidden like if no one sees it, it can't hurt me." "But it's been hurting you anyway," Father Thomas said softly. "Yes. So maybe the old priest said this performance isn't really about the money. Maybe it's about deciding whether you're going to keep running from who you are or whether you're going to stand still and face it." DeShawn pressed his hands against the keys, not playing, just feeling the cool ivory beneath his palms. "I'm so scared. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." But DeShawn, Father Thomas reached out, placed a gnarled hand on DeShawn's shoulder. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite the fear. Tomorrow night you're going to be afraid. You might even mess up. Your hand might hurt. You might look at all those people and want to run. And then what? Then you remember why you're there. Not for Victoria, not even for the money. You're there because a scared young man made a promise to his dying mother that he'd never lose his music. You're there because your sister believes in you. You're there because somewhere inside you that prodigy is still alive, still waiting to shine. Father Thomas smiled. And you play. You play like your life depends on it. Because in a way it does. They sat together in silence for a while. Then Father Thomas said, "Play something for me. Not a lullaby, not practice. Play something that makes you feel alive." DeShawn thought for a moment. Then his hands moved to the keys, and he played the first piece he'd ever performed in competition. The piece that had won him first place at age 8. The piece that had started everything. Chopin's Waltz in C-sharp minor. His hands hurt. His right hand cramped. Some notes didn't sound because the piano keys were broken. But the music was still there. Still beautiful. Still true. When he finished, Father Thomas had tears in his eyes. That the old priest said is why you can't give up. That is a gift. And tomorrow night you're going to share it with the world, whether they deserve it or not. DeShawn looked at his hands, at the scars, at the tremor that never quite went away. "I'll try," he said. "That's all any of us can do," Father Thomas replied. "Tomorrow night." The rehearsal. The moment of truth. DeShawn left the church as the sun was setting. He had 12 hours to prepare. 12 hours before he'd face that piano again. 12 hours before he'd find out if courage was something he still possessed or something the fire had taken along with everything else. The rehearsal was scheduled for 9 p.m. after the hotel's regular business had quieted down. DeShawn arrived at 8:30, entering through the service entrance as instructed. The kitchen staff barely glanced at him, used to seeing temporary workers come and go. He made his way through the familiar corridors up the service elevator to the 3rd floor. The ballroom was transformed. The space that had been empty days ago was now set for the gala. Round tables draped in white linen filled the floor, each set with fine china and crystal that probably cost more than DeShawn had earned in the past year. The stage had been expanded, decorated with elaborate floral arrangements. And there, center stage, was the Steinway polished to perfection under focused stage lights. Victoria was there, standing near the stage, talking to a man in an expensive suit, who DeShawn assumed was some kind of event coordinator. When she saw DeShawn enter, her expression soured. "You're early," she said, making it sound like an accusation. "You said 9 o'clock. I wanted to make sure I wasn't late." Victoria dismissed the event coordinator with a wave. Once they were alone, she walked toward DeShawn, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "Let's be clear about something," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Tomorrow night, this ballroom will be filled with the most important people in the city. People who matter. People who can make or break my reputation. I'm taking an enormous risk allowing you to perform. Do you understand that I understand? I don't think you do." She stepped closer, and DeShawn could smell her expensive perfume. "If you embarrass me, if you make me look foolish in front of these people, I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work anywhere in this city again. I'll have you arrested for trespassing. I'll make your life even more miserable than it already is." DeShawn met her eyes. "I understand. I'll play well." "You'll play perfectly," Victoria corrected. "I don't accept anything less than perfection. Now get up there and show me you're not going to waste my time and money." DeShawn walked to the stage, climbed the steps, and approached the piano. Up close, it was even more magnificent than he'd remembered. The wood gleamed. The keys were pristine. He sat on the bench, adjusted it, and took a breath. His hands were already shaking. "Well," Victoria called out impatiently, "I don't have all night." DeShawn placed his hands on the keys, closed his eyes, and began to play. The piece Victoria had requested for the opening of tomorrow's performance was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding and emotionally powerful pieces in the classical repertoire. Without an orchestra, DeShawn would be playing an arrangement for solo piano, but it was still brutally difficult. The first notes came out wrong. His timing was off. His right hand cramped almost immediately, causing him to miss several notes. He stopped, tried again. The same issues. From the floor, Victoria's voice cut through. "Is this a joke? You told me you could play." "I can," DeShawn said, frustrated with himself. You need what a miracle. I don't pay for miracles, I pay for competence." DeShawn's jaw clenched. He tried a third time, forcing himself to push through the pain, through the mistakes. This time he made it further, almost a full page of the score, before his hand cramped so badly he had to stop. Victoria climbed onto the stage, her face twisted with anger. "This is unacceptable. I should never have trusted a homeless nobody to do this. You're going to ruin everything." Something in DeShawn snapped. 10 years of being invisible, of being looked down on, of being treated as less than human, came rushing up. You know what he said, standing from the bench. "I'm not doing this." "Excuse me. You heard me. I'm not playing for you. Keep your money." He started to walk past her toward the stage steps. Victoria grabbed his arm. "We have a contract. No, we have an agreement that you've been holding over my head with threats since the moment we made it. You don't want me to play. You want me to fail so you can feel superior. Well, congratulations. I quit." He pulled his arm free and made it 2 steps before Victoria's voice stopped him. "Your sister needs that surgery." DeShawn froze. Victoria walked around to face him. Her expression was calculating now, the anger replaced with cold manipulation. Zara Rivers, 16 years old, congenital heart defect, currently at Riverside Group Home. Surgery scheduled for 3 months from now, except there's no money for it. Without the surgery, she has maybe 4 months to live. Did I get that right? Ice flooded DeShawn's veins. "How do you know about Zara? I make it my business to know about the people I hire. I did a background check. Found out all about you, DeShawn Rivers, former child prodigy. Parents died in a fire. Lost a scholarship to Juilliard, became homeless, and left your little sister in foster care because you couldn't take care of her." Victoria tilted her head. "Must be hard knowing you failed her so completely." The words were designed to hurt, and they did. But they also ignited something else. Rage. "Don't you dare talk about my sister," DeShawn said quietly. "I'll talk about whatever I want, because right now I'm the only thing standing between her and death. $20,000. That's what I'm offering you. That's what could save her life. And you're going to throw it away because your pride is hurt." DeShawn's hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body wanted to walk away, wanted to tell Victoria Ashford to go to hell. But Zara's face flashed through his mind. Zara at 6 years old being carried out of the burning building. Zara at 10 asking when she could come home. Zara now 16 and sick, believing in him when no one else did. "I'll play," he said through gritted teeth. "What was that I said I'll play?" Victoria smiled, satisfied. "Good. Now get back to that piano and practice until you can actually perform this piece properly." DeShawn walked back to the bench, sat down. His entire body was shaking now, but not just from fear, from anger, from helplessness, from the knowledge that Victoria Ashford had complete power over him, and was enjoying every second of it. He played. His hand hurt. His heart hurt. But he played. For the next 3 hours, Victoria sat in the ballroom, occasionally shouting criticisms, telling him he was too slow, here, too fast, there, not emotional enough, too emotional, wrong, wrong, wrong. By midnight, DeShawn had played the piece dozens of times. His right hand was on fire, the old injury screaming. His back ached from tension. His soul felt battered. "That's enough," Victoria finally said. "Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. You'll play for 45 minutes. The program is Rachmaninoff's Concerto No. 2 Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat and Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Memorized. Perfect. Understood, understood." And DeShawn Victoria stood preparing to leave. "Don't make me regret this, because if you do, I promise you'll regret it more." She left her footsteps echoing through the empty ballroom. DeShawn remained at the piano, staring at his hands. They were trembling, the right one swollen and painful. 24 hours. In 24 hours, he'd be back here in front of 600 people playing for his sister's life. He played one more piece before he left. Not from Victoria's program. Something for himself. The lullaby his mother used to sing, the one he'd been playing at the church. The ballroom was empty, but he imagined his mother there listening, imagined her smiling at him the way she used to when he was young. "I'm trying, Mama," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm trying." The piano didn't answer, but somewhere in the music he thought maybe he heard her voice. "Keep going, baby. Keep going. You're stronger than you know." He left the hotel at 1 in the morning, walking back toward the bridge, toward his sleeping bag and tarp. Tomorrow night would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But tonight, he'd survived the rehearsal. One step at a time. That's all he could do. One step, one note, one breath at a time. DeShawn barely slept that night. He lay under the bridge, staring up at the concrete underside, playing through the music in his mind. Every note, every passage, every transition. He left before dawn and went to the church. Father Thomas wasn't there yet, but the door was unlocked for him. He played until his hands couldn't take anymore, then rested, then played again. At noon, he forced himself to stop to eat something from the food bank to rest his hand. The swelling had gone down slightly, but it still ached deep in the bones. At 4 p.m., he went to a public restroom and washed himself as best he could. Father Thomas had brought him the vest yesterday, clean and pressed. It was old but well made, probably from the 1970s, slightly too large, but presentable. DeShawn didn't have nice shoes, but he'd cleaned his sneakers as best he could. At 6 p.m., he started making his way to the Ashford Grand Hotel. He arrived at 7, an hour early, wanting time to settle his nerves. The service entrance was busy with catering staff preparing for the gala. No one paid attention to one more person in the chaos. DeShawn made his way to the ballroom level. The transformation was complete. The ballroom had become something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers blazed with light. The tables were set with gold-rimmed china and elaborate centerpieces of orchids and roses. The stage was framed with white curtains and more flowers. Everything sparkled, everything perfect. And there, in the center of it all, the Steinway waited. DeShawn was standing in the wings, looking out at the empty ballroom when Victoria found him. "You're here," she said, sounding almost surprised. "Part of me thought you'd run. I gave my word. Words are cheap. Actions matter." She looked him up and down, her lip curling. "Is that what you're wearing?" DeShawn looked down at the vest. The clean but old slacks Father Thomas had found for him, the sneakers. "It's all I have," Victoria sighed dramatically. Of course it is. Well, at least you're clean. That's something. She checked her watch, a Rolex that probably cost more than Zara's surgery. Guests will start arriving in 30 minutes. You'll play during the cocktail hour, then the 3 main pieces after dinner. Stay backstage until it's time. Don't speak to anyone. Don't make eye contact. Just play and leave. Clear, clear. And DeShawn. Her voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. I meant what I said last night. If you embarrass me, I will make you suffer. Not just by withholding the money, I'll make your sister's life hell. I sit on the board of 3 hospitals in this city. 1 word from me and she'll never get that surgery even if you find the money elsewhere. Do you understand? The threat was so casual, so cruel, that for a moment DeShawn couldn't breathe. She would do it. He could see it in her eyes. She'd hurt a sick teenager just to punish him. I understand, he managed. Good. Victoria started to leave, then paused. Oh, and I've decided on how I'll introduce you. I thought you said I'd just play Changed My Mind. These people need context. They need to know that this is part of my charitable work, giving opportunities to the less fortunate. Her smile was predatory. It'll make them more generous with their donations. Everyone loves a feel-good story. She left before he could respond. DeShawn stood alone in the wings, his stomach churning. He knew what was coming. Victoria was going to humiliate him, was going to use him as a prop in her performance of generosity, was going to make sure everyone knew exactly how far beneath them he was. 30 minutes passed in a blur. DeShawn heard the guests beginning to arrive. Music from a string quartet floated up from the ballroom. Laughter. Conversation. The sounds of wealth and privilege. At 8 p.m., a hotel staff member came to get him. You're on in 5 minutes. DeShawn followed him to the stage entrance. From here, he could see out into the ballroom. It was filled now. 600 people in tuxedos and gowns that cost more than most cars, jewelry that could fund small countries, faces he recognized from magazines and news programs, CEOs, celebrities, politicians, and they were all about to watch him play. His hands started shaking. The panic he'd been holding at bay all day rushed in. He couldn't do this. Couldn't walk out there in front of all those people. Couldn't, ladies and gentlemen. Victoria's voice came through the sound system. She was standing on the stage now, microphone in hand, spotlit. Thank you all for coming to the 23rd Annual Ashford Charity Gala. Tonight we'll be raising money for various causes close to my heart. But before we begin our formal program, I have a special treat for you. DeShawn's heart hammered so hard, he thought it might break through his ribs. As you know, Victoria continued, I believe strongly in giving back, in providing opportunities to those less fortunate. Tonight's pianist is someone I discovered working in this very hotel. He was washing dishes in our kitchen when I learned he had some musical training. I've decided to give him a chance to perform for you as part of my ongoing commitment to helping the disadvantaged. The audience murmured. DeShawn could see some confused faces, some amused ones. So, please, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false kindness. Give a warm welcome to our entertainment tonight, our dishwasher. She didn't even use his name. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of laughter that came from surprise, from the absurdity of the situation. The staff member nudged DeShawn. That's your cue. DeShawn forced his legs to move, forced himself to walk out onto that stage, into that spotlight in front of all those people who were looking at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity to amusement. Victoria handed him the microphone. He wasn't supposed to speak, but she thrust it at him anyway. Say hello to our guests, she said loud enough for only him to hear her smile venomous. DeShawn took the microphone. His hand shook so badly he nearly dropped it. He looked out at the sea of faces, at Victoria standing beside him, enjoying his humiliation. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Hello." Someone in the front row laughed. Someone else whispered to their companion. Victoria took the microphone back. "Wonderful. Now please take your seat at the piano and play for us." DeShawn walked to the bench, sat down. The spotlight was so bright he couldn't see past the first few rows. His hands were positioned over the keys, trembling. The ballroom fell silent, waiting. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. DeShawn closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids he made a choice. He could play for these people, these wealthy guests who saw him as entertainment, as a curiosity, as proof of Victoria Ashford's generosity. Or he could play for the people who mattered. He thought of his mother working 3 jobs so he could have lessons. His father sacrificing everything. Ms. Morrison believing in him when he was just a poor kid from Detroit. Zara lying in a hospital bed believing her brother could still be something special. And Father Thomas saying, "You're not just playing for yourself tonight." DeShawn's hands stopped shaking. He opened his eyes, looked out at the blur of faces, and said quietly, though the microphone had been taken away and no one could hear, "This is for you, Mama. For you, Daddy. For Z. For everyone who believed in the boy I used to be. This is for all of us who've been invisible." His fingers descended to the keys, and DeShawn Rivers began to play. The day before the gala, after the brutal rehearsal with Victoria, DeShawn knew he needed to see Zara one more time. He took the bus to Riverside Group Home, using some of the advance money Victoria had given him. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of better days. Mrs. Patterson at the front desk smiled when she saw him. "DeShawn, Zara will be thrilled. She's been asking about you all week. How is she?" The smile faltered slightly. She had a rough couple of days. Her heart rate was elevated. They had to adjust her medication again. But she's stable now. Room 204, same as always. DeShawn climbed the stairs, his own heart heavy. Every week, it seemed Zara got a little worse. Time was running out, and they both knew it. He found her sitting by the window in her room, a small space she shared with another girl who was currently out. Zara had decorated her side with drawings mostly of piano keys and musical notes, a reminder of the life they'd once had. DeShawn. She turned, and despite the IV line in her arm, despite the paleness of her skin, her face lit up. "You came." He hugged her carefully, feeling how fragile she'd become. At 16, she should have been thinking about driver's licenses and proms and college. Instead, she was thinking about whether her heart would keep beating long enough to see her next birthday. "I'll always come when I can, Z," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "How are you feeling?" "I'm okay," she lied, the same lie she told every time. Then more honestly, tired. "I'm always tired now." DeShawn took her hand, the one without the IV. Her fingers were cold. "I have news. Good news." Her eyes widened. "Tell me." "I got that job I told you about. The piano performance. It's tomorrow night." Tomorrow, Zara gripped his hand tighter. "DeShawn, that's amazing. Are you ready? Are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted. "I haven't played in front of people in 10 years. What if I freeze? What if my hand gives out? What if you're amazing?" Zara interrupted. "What if you walk out there and you remember who you are? What if the music comes back and it's like you never left?" "It's not that simple, Z." "Why not?" She shifted in her bed, sitting up straighter despite the effort it clearly took. "DeShawn, I remember when you used to play, before the fire. I was little, but I remember. You'd sit at the piano, and it was like you became someone else, someone magical. The music would fill our whole apartment, and Mom would cry because she was so proud, and Dad would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. Tears pricked at DeShawn's eyes. That was a long time ago. It was 10 years ago. But that person is still in you. I know he is, because I still see glimpses of him. When you talk about music, your whole face changes. You look like you used to look when you were happy. I'm not sure I remember how to be happy anymore. Zara was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the sunset. Then she said, "Do you remember what Mom used to say about your gift?" She said a lot of things. She said that music was how you talked to God. That when you played, you were speaking a language most people never learn. She said that's why people cried when they heard you. Because they were hearing something true, something real, something that touched the deepest part of their souls. DeShawn closed his eyes, remembering. His mother standing in the doorway of the community center practice room, listening to him play, tears streaming down her face. "Do you remember the last thing she said to me?" Zara asked. "Before she died, she told you to take care of me." "No. I mean, yes, she said that. But she said something else too." Zara's voice got soft, reverent. She said, "Zara, baby, your brother has a gift from God. Don't ever let him forget that. Don't let him bury it. Even if I'm not here, even if things get hard, make sure he keeps playing. Because the world needs his music, and he needs it too." The tears came, then hot and unstoppable. DeShawn had held them back for so long, had forced himself to be strong, to not feel, to not break. But here with Zara, he couldn't hold on anymore. "I miss her so much," he whispered. "I miss both of them. And I'm so angry, Z. Angry that they died. Angry that the fire took everything. Angry that I couldn't save them. Angry that I failed you, that I let you end up here, that I can't give you the life they would have wanted for you." "You didn't fail me," Zara said fiercely. She reached up, wiped his tears with her small, cold hand. "You saved my life that night. You got me out of that building, and every day since you've been fighting for me. Working terrible jobs, living on the streets, but still trying to take care of me. You think I don't know how hard you've been trying? It's not enough. You're still sick. You still need surgery. I can't afford. But you're trying to get the money. This performance, it's going to help, right?" DeShawn nodded. $20,000. It's not all of what we need, but it's a start. Then tomorrow night, Zara said, you're not just playing for the money. You're playing for Mom and Dad. You're playing for all those years you lost. You're playing to prove that the fire didn't win, that it didn't destroy you completely. She gripped his hand tighter. "And you're playing for me. Because, DeShawn, I need you to remember who you are, not just as my brother, but as a musician, as the prodigy who made people cry with his music. I need you to be that person again, because that person has hope. And we need hope." They sat together as the sun set completely, the room growing dark except for the soft glow of the hallway light coming under the door. "Will you tell me about the performance?" Zara asked. "Where is it, the Ashford Grand Hotel? It's this huge charity gala. 600 people." Zara's eyes went wide. 600. DeShawn? That's huge. I know. That's part of why I'm terrified. What are you playing? Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. "Those are Mom's favorites," Zara said softly. "She used to play recordings of those pieces all the time." "I know. That's why I chose them." He hadn't told Victoria that. She'd given him a program, but he'd substituted pieces, chosen ones that meant something. "If I'm going to do this, If I'm going to play in front of all those people, I want to play something that honors her. She would love that, Zara said. Then, hesitantly, DeShawn, can I ask you for something? Anything. When you're up there, when you're playing, I want you to play one extra piece, just for me. What piece? The lullaby. The one Mom used to sing to me. The one you turned into a piano piece. Do you remember? He remembered. He'd composed it himself when he was 14, taking the simple melody their mother hummed and turning it into something more complex, more beautiful. He'd played it for Zara every night before bed until the fire. I remember. Play that, not for the audience, just for yourself, for me, for Mom. Play it and remember that no matter what happens tomorrow night, no matter how scared you are, you're not alone. We're all there with you. DeShawn hugged his sister, careful of her IV line, careful of her fragile body. I'll play it, I promise. They talked for another hour until the nurse came in to remind DeShawn that visiting hours were over. Zara was getting tired anyway, her energy fading as it always did in the evenings. As he was leaving, Zara called out to him one more time. DeShawn. He turned back. I'm proud of you. Mom and Dad would be proud too. Not because of the money, not because of the gala, but because you're fighting. You're still here, still trying, still refusing to give up. That's what makes you a hero, not the music. The courage to keep going when everything is broken. DeShawn couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He just nodded and left before she could see him cry again. On the bus ride back to the bridge, he thought about what Zara had said. About courage. About hope. About being a hero. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a scared man who was barely holding himself together playing a concert he had no business playing for a woman who saw him as less than human. But tomorrow night, for 45 minutes, he'd pretend. He'd pretend to be the musician he'd once been. He'd pretend the past 10 years hadn't happened. He'd pretend his parents were in the audience watching with pride. And maybe, just maybe, if he pretended hard enough, it would become true. One more day, one more night. And then everything would change. DeShawn didn't return to the bridge that night. Instead, he went to the church. Father Thomas was there, sitting in one of the pews, reading by the light of a battery-powered lantern. He looked up when DeShawn entered. I had a feeling you might come tonight, the old priest said. I can't sleep, DeShawn admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see that ballroom. All those people. And I freeze up. Come sit. DeShawn sat beside him. The church was cold quiet, except for the distant sounds of the city outside. Tell me what you're most afraid of, Father Thomas said. That I'll fail. That I'll get up there and my hands won't work. That I'll forget the music. That I'll prove Victoria right, that I'm just a nobody who should have stayed in his place. And if you do fail, if the worst happens, DeShawn looked at the old man. Then Zara doesn't get her surgery. Then I've let down everyone who ever believed in me. Then the fire wins. It takes everything, including the last piece of who I was. Father Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. Can you do that? You've already survived the worst thing that could happen. You lost your parents, you lost your home, you lost your future. You've been homeless, hungry, hopeless. You've lived through things that would have broken most people. And yet here you sit the night before you're going to play piano in front of 600 people. That alone is a victory. It doesn't feel like a victory, because you're measuring success by the wrong metric. You think success is playing perfectly, impressing those wealthy people, earning Victoria's approval. But DeShawn, you've already succeeded just by getting here, just by choosing to play again after 10 years, just by refusing to let the fire take your music forever. But what if I actually fail? What if Then you fail, Father Thomas said simply. Then you walk off that stage knowing you tried, knowing you faced your fear, knowing you didn't let Victoria Ashford or anyone else take away your choice to play. And then you figure out another way to help Zara. You keep fighting because that's what you do. You survive. DeShawn thought about that. About survival. About all the ways he'd survived the past 10 years. Can I tell you a story? Father Thomas asked. Okay. 50 years ago, I was a young priest, 28 years old. I'd just been assigned to my first parish, and I was terrified. I was supposed to give my first sermon, and I was convinced I'd fail. I'd forget my words. People would laugh. I'd prove I wasn't cut out to be a priest. He smiled at the memory. I went to my mentor, an old priest who'd been doing this for 40 years, and I told him I was afraid. You know what he said? What he said? Thomas, fear is just a sign that you care. If you weren't afraid, it would mean this didn't matter to you. Your fear is proof that you understand the weight of what you're about to do. So don't run from the fear. Let it remind you why you're doing this in the first place. Did it help? When you gave the sermon, I stumbled through it, forgot whole sections. My voice shook. It was objectively terrible. Father Thomas chuckled. But at the end, an old woman came up to me. She said, "Father, I could tell you were nervous, but I could also tell you meant every word. That matters more than being perfect." And she was right. You think the audience tomorrow will feel that way? I think most of the audience tomorrow won't matter at all. They're not there for you. They're there to be seen to socialize, to write off donations on their taxes. But DeShawn, there might be one person who actually listens, one person who hears something in your playing that touches them. And if you can reach that one person, then it's worth it. They sat in silence. Then DeShawn said, "Will you pray with me? I haven't prayed in a long time, since the fire. I've been angry at God. God can handle your anger. But I need to ask for something. For help. For strength. For my hands to work. For everything to be okay tomorrow." Father Thomas took DeShawn's hands in his. The old priest's hands were gnarled with arthritis, barely able to bend, but they held DeShawn's firmly. "Let's pray," he said. They prayed together in that cold, abandoned church. DeShawn didn't have eloquent words. He just spoke from his heart, asking for courage for his hands to hold steady, for the music to come back to him, for Zara to live, for everything to somehow be okay. When they finished, Father Thomas said, "Now go to that piano. Play until you can't anymore. Play until the fear turns into something else. Play until you remember why you fell in love with music in the first place." DeShawn went to the old upright piano. He sat down and began to play. He played for hours. Every piece Victoria had assigned. The lullaby for Zara. Pieces from his childhood. Pieces that made him remember his mother's smile and his father's pride and Miss Morrison's encouragement. His right hand ached, cramped. Sometimes the notes came out wrong because the piano keys stuck, or his fingers couldn't quite reach. But he played through it all. Father Thomas sat in the pew, listening, his eyes closed. Around 3 in the morning, DeShawn finally stopped. His hands couldn't take any more. He rested his head on the piano, exhausted. "You're ready," Father Thomas said from the darkness. "I don't feel ready. You never will. But you're ready anyway." DeShawn stood, stretching his cramped muscles. "Thank you for letting me practice here, for listening, for everything. It's been my privilege," Father Thomas said. "Watching you find your way back to music has been one of the joys of my old age. Whatever happens tomorrow, DeShawn, remember this. You are not defined by what you've lost. You're defined by what you do with what remains. They embraced the young man and the old priest, two people who'd found each other in an abandoned church, and helped each other remember that they weren't alone. DeShawn left as dawn was breaking. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled past, early morning joggers started their routes. Another day beginning, the last day before everything changed. He returned to the bridge to his sleeping spot. Tried to rest. Couldn't. His mind was too full of music, of fear, of anticipation. At noon, he got up, ate something. His stomach was too nervous to keep much down. At 2 p.m., he washed his clothes in a public restroom sink, hung them to dry. At 4 p.m., he began preparing himself mentally, going through the music in his mind, visualizing success. At 6 p.m., he dressed in Father Thomas's vest, the clean slacks, the sneakers he'd polished as best he could. At 7 p.m., he started walking toward the Ashford Grand Hotel. Each step brought him closer to the moment of truth. Each step felt like walking toward either his salvation or his destruction. He wouldn't know which until the last note faded. The morning of the gala. DeShawn woke before dawn, his body refusing to let him sleep any longer. He'd only managed a few hours of fitful rest, his dreams filled with burning pianos and audiences that laughed and vanished. Now, lying under his tarp as rain pattered above, he stared up at the concrete underside of the Morrison Street Bridge and tried to calm his racing heart. Today was the day. In 12 hours, he'd be on that stage. He got up, rolled his sleeping bag, and made his way through the wet streets to a 24-hour convenience store. The clerk barely glanced at him as he bought a cup of cheap coffee with some of Victoria's advance money. He sat on a bus stop bench, watching the city wake up, sipping the bitter liquid and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. At 7 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. He'd bought the cheapest prepaid phone last week, so Zara's social worker could reach him. The text read, "DeShawn, it's Mrs. Chen from Riverside. Zara asked me to text you. She wanted you to know she's thinking of you today. She believes in you. We all do." He stared at the message, his eyes stinging. Zara. Everything was for Zara. He texted back, "Thank you. Tell her I love her." At 8 a.m., Father Thomas found him at the church. The old priest had brought breakfast, 2 sandwiches from a deli, bottled water, and an apple. "You need to eat," Father Thomas said, sitting beside him on the piano bench. "You can't play on an empty stomach." DeShawn forced himself to eat, though the food tasted like sawdust. His stomach was twisted in knots, his hands already shaking. "Tell me honestly," DeShawn said between bites. "Do you think I can do this?" Father Thomas considered the question seriously. "I think you're capable of extraordinary things. I've heard you play. I've seen your talent. Can you walk out on that stage and perform perfectly?" "Maybe. Maybe not. But can you walk out there and give everything you have, play from your soul, honor the gift your mother saw in you? Absolutely. That's not the same as succeeding. Isn't it?" Father Thomas turned to look at him. DeShawn's success isn't about Victoria Ashford's approval or impressing wealthy strangers. Success is about looking yourself in the mirror and knowing you faced your fear. Knowing you tried. Knowing you didn't let the past win. They sat together until 10 a.m., talking sometimes, sitting in companionable silence other times. Father Thomas told stories about his life, about the parishioners he'd known, about the music that had filled this church before it closed. DeShawn listened, grateful for the distraction. At 11 a.m., Father Thomas said, "I want to give you something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden cross on a simple chain. It was old, worn smooth by decades of handling. "This was my mother's," Father Thomas said. "She gave it to me when I entered seminary. It's been with me for 60 years through every challenge, every moment of doubt, every prayer. I want you to have it tonight." "Father, I can't. It's too important. Exactly why I'm giving it to you. This performance is important. You need all the help you can get." He pressed the cross into DeShawn's hand. "Wear it under your shirt. Let it remind you that you're not alone. That prayers go with you. That faith isn't about being certain of the outcome, it's about having the courage to try, even when you're not." DeShawn closed his fingers around the cross. It was warm from Father Thomas's pocket. "Thank you." "Now," Father Thomas said, standing with effort, "I want you to play one more time. Not Victoria's program. Not practice. Just play something that makes you feel alive. Play something that reminds you why you fell in love with music." DeShawn sat at the piano and played the first piece he'd ever learned. A simple Bach minuet, the piece his mother had clapped for when he was 5 years old, his little fingers struggling to reach the keys. As he played, he remembered being that 5-year-old boy. Remembered the joy of making sounds come from the piano. Remembered his mother's smile, the way she'd call his father over Marcus. "Come listen to our boy. He's playing music." The memory didn't hurt. For the first time in 10 years, remembering his mother didn't bring pain. It brought warmth, gratitude, love. When he finished, Father Thomas was crying softly. That, the old priest said, is what you need to hold on to tonight. That feeling, that joy, that love, no matter what Victoria says, no matter how the audience reacts, you hold on to that. DeShawn practiced a few more times, running through the difficult passages, making sure his fingers remembered. His right hand ached, but held steady. At 2 p.m., Father Thomas insisted he stop. "You'll tire yourself out. Your hands need rest." They walked together to a small park nearby. Sat on a bench watching people go about their normal days. Parents with children. Teenagers laughing. An old couple feeding pigeons. Normal life going on like it always did, while DeShawn's entire world balanced on the edge of this one night. "Are you afraid?" Father Thomas asked. "Terrified." "Good. Channel that fear into passion. Let it fuel your playing." Fear and excitement are close cousins. The same adrenaline, the same racing heart. You just have to decide which emotion you'll let win. At 4 p.m., they returned to the church. DeShawn tried to rest lying on a pew with his backpack as a pillow. He didn't sleep, but he rested his body, his hands, his mind. At 6 p.m., he washed up in the church bathroom, changed into his performance clothes. The vest, the slacks, the sneakers. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror. He looked tired, older than 28. But his eyes held something they hadn't in years. Determination. Father Thomas helped him with his collar, adjusting it so the vest sat properly. "You look like a musician," he said. "Not like a homeless man or a dishwasher, like what you are, an artist." "I don't feel like an artist. Fake it until you make it, as the young people say." Father Thomas smiled. "You'll grow into the role once you start playing." At 7 p.m., it was time to leave. DeShawn packed the cross inside his shirt, felt it rest against his heart. Father Thomas walked him to the church door. "I'll be praying for you. Every minute you're on that stage, I'll be right here praying. I wish you could come. I wish you could be there. I'll be there in spirit." And DeShawn. The old priest gripped his shoulder. "Whatever happens tonight, come back tomorrow. Come tell me about it. Don't disappear. Promise me. I promise." They embraced one final time. "Go make beautiful music," Father Thomas said. Go show them what God's gift looks like." DeShawn walked out into the evening. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. Stars were beginning to appear. He had 1 hour to get to the Ashford Grand Hotel. 1 hour before his life changed forever. He walked through the city, each step bringing him closer to his destiny. The prodigy from Detroit had one more performance to give. And this time, he wouldn't be playing for approval or money or survival. He'd be playing for redemption. The Ashford Grand Hotel rose above the city like a monument to wealth and power. Every window blazed with light. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, dropping off guests in designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Valets rushed back and forth. Photographers captured arrivals for society pages. DeShawn stood across the street watching this world he didn't belong to, feeling the cross against his chest, feeling his heart race. He couldn't go through the front entrance. His instructions were clear, service entrance only. Don't be seen by the guests until it's time to perform. He made his way around the block to the alley behind the hotel. The service entrance was busy with catering staff, florists making last-minute adjustments, hotel employees coordinating the massive event. No one paid attention to one more person slipping inside. The service corridors were a maze of activity. Waiters carried trays of champagne. Chefs shouted orders in the kitchen. Event coordinators spoke rapidly into headsets. DeShawn followed the route he'd learned during rehearsal. Through the corridors past the kitchen, up the service elevator to the 3rd floor. He arrived at the backstage area of the Grand Ballroom at 7:45 p.m. 15 minutes until he was supposed to begin playing. He peered through a gap in the curtains and saw the ballroom in its full glory. Every table was filled. 600 people in their finest jewelry, catching the light from massive crystal chandeliers. The stage was set with elaborate floral arrangements. And there, center stage, the Steinway grand piano waited under a spotlight. His stomach lurched. "You're here." DeShawn turned to see Victoria approaching. She was resplendent in a gold evening gown that probably cost more than a car diamonds at her throat and wrists. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. And her expression when she looked at DeShawn was pure disdain. "Is that what you're wearing?" She asked the same question as last night. "It's all I have." She sighed, a sound of deep disappointment. "I suppose it will have to do. At least it fits with the narrative. The struggling dishwasher given a chance. The guests will eat it up." She checked her watch. "In 10 minutes, I'll introduce you. Remember our agreement. You play perfectly, you get paid. You embarrass me and I make your life hell." "Clear, clear." Victoria studied him for a moment. "You look terrified. Are you going to be able to do this?" "I'll do it. You better. There are very important people out there. People who could ruin my reputation with one word. People I've worked years to impress. If you mess this up, if you make me look foolish for giving you this opportunity..." She didn't finish the threat. She didn't need to. A hotel staff member approached. "Ms. Ashford, it's time." Victoria's expression transformed instantly. The cruel sneer vanished, replaced with a warm, gracious smile. The public face, the mask she wore for her guests. "Thank you, David." She turned back to DeShawn, the mask slipping for just a moment. "Don't make me regret this." She swept away heels clicking on the floor to make her entrance into the ballroom. DeShawn was alone in the wings. He could hear Victoria's voice through the sound system greeting her guests, thanking them for coming, talking about the importance of charity and giving back. His hands were shaking again. He pressed them together, trying to stop the tremor. The cross under his shirt felt heavy. He touched it through the fabric, remembering Father Thomas's prayer, remembering Zara's belief in him. "I can do this," he whispered to himself. "I can do this." But saying it didn't make the fear go away. Through the curtain he could see the audience. So many people. All of them wealthy, successful, confident. All of them looking at him as entertainment, as a curiosity, as proof of Victoria's generosity. He saw a woman in the front row wearing a necklace that could fund Zara's surgery twice over, laughing with her companion about something. Saw a man checking his phone, barely paying attention. Saw table after table of people who had never known struggle, never known hunger, never known what it felt like to be invisible. And he was supposed to play for them, supposed to bare his soul for people who saw him as less than. The anger came then sudden and hot. Anger at Victoria for her cruelty. Anger at the injustice of the world where these people had everything, while he and Zara had nothing. Anger at the fire that had taken his parents. Anger at God for letting it all happen. But underneath the anger, something else stirred. Something that had been dormant for 10 years. Pride. He was DeShawn Rivers, once called Detroit's musical miracle, once destined for Juilliard and concert halls, and a career that would have made his parents proud. The fire had taken everything, but it hadn't taken his gift. That was still there, buried deep, waiting. And tonight he was going to show all these people what real music sounded like, not for their approval, not for Victoria's money, but because he was a musician, and musicians played. He was going to play for his mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for his lessons, for his father, who'd believed in him before anyone else, for Ms. Morrison, who'd seen the gift when he was just a poor kid from Detroit, for Zara, fighting for her life in a group home, for Father Thomas praying for him in an abandoned church, and for himself, for the boy he'd been and the man he was trying to become. Victoria's voice cut through his thoughts. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier, I have a special performance for you tonight. As part of my commitment to giving back to providing opportunities for those less fortunate, I'm pleased to introduce our pianist for this evening. Here it comes, DeShawn thought. The humiliation. The introduction designed to make sure everyone knew how far beneath them he was. Working in this very hotel, Victoria continued, I discovered someone with musical training, and I've decided to give him a chance to perform for you tonight. Please welcome our dishwasher. The words hit him exactly as they had at rehearsal. The diminishment. The erasure of his name, his identity reducing him to just a job, just a function. Laughter rippled through the ballroom again. Not mean-spirited necessarily, but amused, surprised. The kind of laughter that came from the absurdity of a dishwasher playing at a gala. The staff member nudged DeShawn. That's your cue. Go. DeShawn took a breath, touched the cross one more time, and stepped out onto the stage. The spotlight hit him immediately, bright and hot. He couldn't see past the first few rows. The audience was a blur of faces, designer clothes, jewelry that sparkled. He walked to the piano, each step feeling like he was walking through water. The Steinway gleamed under the light. Beautiful. Perfect. Waiting. He sat on the bench, adjusted it, his hands positioned over the keys. The ballroom fell completely silent. 600 people waiting to see what would happen, waiting to see if Victoria's charity case could actually play. DeShawn's hands shook. His right hand ached already, the old injury making itself known. In the front row, he could see Victoria watching him with an expression that was part challenge, part anticipation of his failure. In the Wings Hotel, staff watched, probably betting on whether he'd make it through even one piece. And somewhere out in that sea of faces, maybe someone actually wanted to hear music. Maybe one person would actually listen. DeShawn closed his eyes, and he began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 emerged from the Steinway, and for a moment the world held its breath. But only for a moment. DeShawn's hands were shaking so badly that the opening phrase came out tentative, uncertain. His right hand cramped almost immediately, causing him to fumble a transition. He pushed through, but he could hear the mistakes, could feel the music falling apart under his fingers. In the audience, he heard whispers beginning. Couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Disappointment, judgment, amusement. He tried to focus, tried to find the music, but the stage lights were so bright, the silence so oppressive, the weight of 600 judging eyes so heavy that he couldn't breathe. 20 measures in his hand cramped completely. He had to stop, flex his fingers, start the phrase again. More whispers. Some laughter, now less polite. He could see Victoria's face, her expression transforming from anticipation to fury to something like vindication. See her face said, "I knew you'd fail. I knew you were nothing." DeShawn tried to continue, but the music wouldn't come. His fingers wouldn't obey. The notes that had flowed so easily at the abandoned church now felt impossible out of reach. He stopped completely, sat at the piano, his hands in his lap, his head bowed. The silence was deafening. Then Victoria's voice amplified through the sound system, dripping with false sympathy. "I think perhaps this is too ambitious a piece to start with. Perhaps something simpler." Laughter from the audience. Real laughter now. At him. At his failure. At the absurdity of a dishwasher thinking he could play Rachmaninoff. DeShawn looked up, looked out at the sea of faces. Saw the mockery. Saw people checking their phones already dismissing him. Saw others whispering to their companions, entertaining themselves with his humiliation. Saw one man in the back standing near the exit, arms crossed, watching with what looked like professional interest. But that one face was lost in the sea of dismissal. He looked down at his hands, at the scars from the fire, at the tremor that wouldn't stop, at 10 years of loss and pain and survival. He thought about his mother, about how she'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him this gift, how she'd believed in him when no one else did, how she'd died telling Zara not to let him give up music. He thought about Zara lying in a hospital bed, believing her brother could still be something special. He thought about Father Thomas praying for him right now in an abandoned church. And he thought about Victoria Ashford, who'd used him, humiliated him, dangled money in front of him like he was a performing animal, all to make herself look charitable in front of her wealthy friends. Something inside DeShawn shifted. The fear was still there. The panic was still there. But underneath it all, rising up from somewhere deep and primal, came anger. No, he wouldn't let it end like this. He'd survived his parents' death. He'd survived the fire. He'd survived 10 years on the streets, 10 years of being invisible, 10 years of people looking through him like he didn't exist. He'd survived all of that, and he'd be damned if he'd let Victoria Ashford and her wealthy friends define him. DeShawn's hands went back to the keys, but he didn't play Rachmaninoff. Not yet. Instead, he played something else, something Victoria hadn't approved, something that wasn't on the program. He played the lullaby, the one his mother used to sing to Zara, the one he'd composed when he was 14, turning a simple melody into something profound. His hands moved across the keys, and this time they didn't shake. This time the music came, Simple at first, just the melody, pure and clear and heartbreaking. The audience quieted. The whispers stopped. DeShawn opened his eyes, and as he played, he spoke. Not through a microphone, just his voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "My name is DeShawn Rivers." His fingers continued playing the lullaby, the music underscoring his words. "I'm not just a dishwasher. I'm a musician. I was born in Detroit to parents who had nothing but gave me everything. My mother worked 3 jobs so I could have piano lessons. My father sacrificed his dreams so I could pursue mine." The lullaby built, growing more complex, more emotional. When I was 8 years old, I won my first competition. By 17, I had a full scholarship to Juilliard. I was going to be somebody. I was going to make my parents proud. His right hand found a counter melody, painful but beautiful. Then there was a fire. My parents died. My hands were burned. Everything I'd worked for, everything they'd sacrificed for, gone in one night. I lost everything. My home, my family, my future, my music. The lullaby swelled, reaching its emotional peak. For 10 years, I ran from music. Because every time I played, I saw the fire. I heard my mother screaming. I felt the heat on my skin. I couldn't bear it. So I gave up on myself. Gave up on the gift my mother died, asking me not to abandon. The music softened, becoming tender, becoming a prayer. Tonight I'm standing in front of you, and yes, I'm a dishwasher. Yes, I'm homeless. Yes, I'm everything you see when you look at me and dismiss me. But I'm also a musician. I'm also a brother trying to save his sister's life. I'm also someone who survived when survival seemed impossible. The lullaby concluded, the final notes hanging in the air like tears. The ballroom was silent, completely, utterly silent. DeShawn looked out at the audience, at Victoria, whose face had gone white, at the 600 people who were no longer laughing, no longer dismissing him. "This is for my mother," DeShawn said quietly. "This is for my father. This is for my sister. This is for everyone who's ever been invisible. This is for everyone who's ever been told they don't matter." He positioned his hands over the keys again. "And this is for me, for the musician I used to be, and the man I'm trying to become." And then DeShawn Rivers began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. But this time, he didn't play it scared. He didn't play it tentative. He didn't play it trying to please Victoria or impress the wealthy guests. He played it like his life depended on it. Because it did. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 is one of the most emotionally powerful beginnings in all of classical music. Those first chords heavy and foreboding like fate knocking at the door. DeShawn's hands came down on the keys with force, with certainty, with 10 years of suppressed emotion pouring through his fingers. The music filled the ballroom, rich and dark and impossibly beautiful. Every note precise now. Every phrase shaped with intention. His right hand, which had been cramping and failing just minutes ago, moved across the keys with increasing confidence. The fear was gone. Or rather, it had transformed. The adrenaline that had been feeding his panic was now feeding his passion. The trembling in his hands became vibrato, became expression, became part of the music itself. The audience, which had been amused and dismissive, fell into stunned silence. This wasn't what they'd expected. They'd expected a novelty, a feel-good story about a poor dishwasher trying his best. They'd expected to be able to smile patronizingly and applaud politely and go back to their champagne and conversations. They hadn't expected this, hadn't expected real artistry, real emotion, real music that grabbed you by the throat and made you feel things you'd rather not feel. DeShawn moved into the first melodic section, and his playing became both technically brilliant and emotionally devastating. The melody sang out sweet and mournful, a song of loss and longing. He thought of his mother as he played, could almost see her standing in the doorway of the community center practice room, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her young son create magic. "Baby," she'd said that day, "you don't just play the piano. You speak through it. You're telling stories with those keys. Keep doing that. Always keep doing that." He was telling a story now. The story of a family that had nothing but each other. The story of sacrifice and love. The story of a mother who'd worked herself to death for her son's gift. The story of a father who'd never complained about his own abandoned dreams because he was too busy supporting his sons. The music built in intensity, and DeShawn's hands flew across the keys. The difficult passages that had seemed impossible during rehearsal now flowed naturally. His body remembered. His fingers remembered. The music had always been there, just waiting for him to stop being afraid and let it out. In the audience, a woman in the third row had stopped checking her phone. She was crying silent tears streaming down her face, transfixed by the music. A man in the back, the one who'd been watching with professional interest, had moved closer. Standing now at the edge of the seating area, his expression one of shock and recognition. Even people who'd been whispering and dismissing him moments ago had gone quiet, drawn in despite themselves. But DeShawn didn't see any of this. His eyes were closed now. He was somewhere else. Somewhere the ballroom and its wealthy guests didn't exist. Somewhere he was just a musician and a piano, and the music that had always lived inside him. The first movement built to its climax, the chords becoming more powerful, more urgent, like waves crashing against rocks. DeShawn's entire body moved with the music, leaning into the powerful sections, pulling back for the tender ones. His right hand ached. The old injury burned. But he pushed through, because the pain was part of the story too. The pain was real, the scars were real, the loss was real, and he was going to make everyone in this ballroom feel it. As he reached the transition to the second movement, something unexpected happened. Someone in the audience let out an audible gasp. Not of surprise, of recognition. The man who'd been standing at the back was now walking down the center aisle. His eyes fixed on DeShawn, his expression one of absolute disbelief. But DeShawn didn't notice. He was lost in the second movement now, the famous melody, one of the most beautiful themes ever written. Romantic and sweeping and full of hope, despite the underlying sadness. This was the section his mother had loved most. She'd play recordings of this piece on their old stereo, and she'd close her eyes and sway, lost in the beauty of it. This music, she'd told young DeShawn, this is what heaven sounds like. This is what love sounds like. When you play this someday, play it like you're telling someone you love them. DeShawn played it now like a love letter. To his mother, to his father, to Zara. To everyone who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. The melody soared, and DeShawn's playing became transcendent. He wasn't a homeless man anymore. He wasn't a dishwasher. He wasn't a failure or a victim or invisible. He was a musician. A real one. The prodigy who'd never really died, just gone into hiding. And now he was back. The second movement built to its own climax, and DeShawn could feel tears on his face, but he didn't stop playing. Couldn't stop. The music was pouring out of him like a flood that had been held back too long. In the wing's hotel staff, who'd been skeptical, who'd probably bet on his failure, stood transfixed. At her table, Victoria Ashford sat, frozen. her champagne glass forgotten in her hand, her face an unreadable mixture of emotions. And somewhere in that audience of 600 people, more were crying now. Because music like this played with this much truth, this much pain, this much beauty, it broke through all the walls people built. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, powerful or powerless. Music this honest made everyone equal. DeShawn moved into the third movement, the technically brilliant finale. His fingers flew across the keys, the rapid passages emerging crystal clear despite his damaged hand. This was the showpiece section, the part that was supposed to demonstrate technical skill. But DeShawn wasn't playing it to show off. He was playing it like a man running toward something. Running toward hope. Running toward redemption. Running toward life. The music accelerated, became almost frantic, the notes cascading over each other, building and building toward the conclusion. And as he approached the final chord progression, the famous ending that everyone who knew classical music recognized, DeShawn opened his eyes. He looked out at the audience for the first time since he'd truly started playing, and what he saw took his breath away. Every single person was watching him. No phones, no whispers, no dismissal. 600 pairs of eyes fixed on him, witnessing him, seeing him as more than just a dishwasher or a homeless man or a charity case. Seeing him as an artist. His hands came down on the final chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, powerful and triumphant and final. The last note rang out, held by the pedal, filling the ballroom, fading slowly into silence. DeShawn's hands remained on the keys, his head bowed, his breath coming in gasps. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched. Then someone started clapping. The applause started with one person, the man who'd walked down the center aisle. He stood at the front of the seating area, clapping slowly, deliberately, his face wet with tears. Then someone else joined, the woman in the third row who'd been crying. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was standing. 600 people rising from their seats, applauding, many of them crying openly. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the kind of clapping you did because you were supposed to. This was genuine, raw, spontaneous. DeShawn looked up, stunned. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected anything but to get through the piece and collect Victoria's money and disappear. But this was something else entirely. The applause continued building in intensity. People were shouting, "Bravo!" Several were openly weeping. Others looked shell-shocked, like they'd witnessed something they couldn't quite process. Victoria stood at her table, her face pale, clapping mechanically. She looked like she'd been struck. Her plan to use him as a prop for her charity had backfired spectacularly. He wasn't supposed to be this good. He was supposed to be adequate, at best, a feel-good novelty. He wasn't supposed to be brilliant. But he was. Everyone in that room knew it now. The applause finally began to fade, after what felt like forever. People sat down reluctantly, still emotional, still processing what they'd just heard. DeShawn remained at the piano bench, his hands shaking again now that the music had stopped. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him exhausted and overwhelmed. He had 2 more pieces to play. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat and Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Could he do it? Could he maintain this level of playing? He thought of Zara, thought of the $20,000 Victoria had promised, thought of everything riding on this night. He had to keep going. DeShawn took a breath, composed himself, and began the Nocturne. Chopin's music was different from Rachmaninoff's, more intimate, more like a private conversation than a grand statement. The nocturne was tender and melancholic, a piece about loneliness and beauty and the quiet moments of life. DeShawn's playing was softer now, more introspective. His right hand wove the melody while his left provided gentle support, the two hands speaking to each other like old friends. He thought about the nights on the street, lying awake under the bridge, listening to the city sounds. The nights he'd felt so alone, he thought he might disappear entirely. The nights he'd wondered if anyone would even notice if he died. But he hadn't died. He'd survived. And somehow impossibly, he'd found his way back to music. The nocturne built gradually, the emotions deepening, becoming more complex. There was sadness here, yes, but also acceptance. Also peace. Also a kind of weary hope. In the audience, people listened with the same intense focus they'd given the Rachmaninoff. Several more were crying now. The music was hitting them somewhere deep, somewhere they usually kept protected behind their wealth and status and busy lives. DeShawn played through the most difficult section where the melody fragments and reforms where Chopin's genius really shows. His damaged hand protested, but he pushed through, making the pain part of the expression. The piece concluded quietly, tenderly, the last notes fading into silence like a whispered goodbye. Again, the audience erupted. The standing ovation was immediate this time, no hesitation. DeShawn didn't have time to process it. He moved directly into the final piece. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. This was the piece everyone knew, even people who didn't know classical music. Those famous opening notes, simple but haunting. DeShawn played them with delicate precision. The first movement of the Moonlight Sonata is like a meditation, each note clear and separate, building a mood of profound melancholy. But DeShawn wasn't playing it as a performance piece. He was playing it as a memorial for his mother, for his father, for Ms. Morrison, who'd passed away 2 years ago while he'd been too broken to attend her funeral, for every person he'd met on the streets who'd died invisible and unmourned. The first movement floated through the ballroom like a ghost, beautiful and sad and ethereal. When it concluded, DeShawn paused for only a moment before launching into the second movement. This was a brief respite, lighter and more playful, like a memory of happier times. He thought of his childhood, of practicing at the community center, of his mother's smile when he played something well, of his father lifting him up in celebration when he won his first competition, of young Zara dancing around their small apartment while he practiced. Those memories didn't hurt anymore. They just were. Part of him. Part of the story that had led him here. The second movement ended, and without pause, DeShawn dove into the third movement. This was the showstopper. The famous third movement of the Moonlight Sonata is one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. Rapid arpeggios flying across the keyboard at breakneck speed, requiring absolute precision and endurance. DeShawn's hands moved faster than seemed possible, the notes cascading in torrents. His right hand screamed in protest, but he was beyond pain now, beyond fear, beyond everything except the music. This movement wasn't sad or tender or melancholic. It was fury. It was all the anger he'd felt for 10 years, all the rage at the injustice of life, all the frustration of survival channeled into Beethoven's brilliant, brutal composition. The music stormed through the ballroom like a hurricane. People in the audience sat forward in their seats, mesmerized by the technical brilliance, by the sheer physical feat of playing this piece at this level. Victoria gripped her champagne glass so tightly it was amazing it didn't shatter. The man who'd started the standing ovation was crying again, his hand over his mouth. Throughout the room, people were having the same reaction. This wasn't just music anymore. This was testimony. This was a man laying his soul bare in front of 600 strangers, holding nothing back, demanding that they witness his pain and his triumph. The third movement built to its crushing climax, the chords becoming massive and overwhelming, like the universe itself crashing down. And then with a final devastating chord, it ended. DeShawn's hands fell from the keys. He slumped forward, completely spent. His right hand was swollen now, throbbing with pain. His back ached. His shoulders burned. He was exhausted in every possible way, but he'd done it. He'd played all three pieces. Played them better than he'd ever played in his life. The silence after the final chord lasted only a heartbeat. Then the ballroom exploded. The standing ovation this time was thunderous. Not just applause, but shouting, cheering, some people openly sobbing. It went on and on, wave after wave of acclaim. DeShawn sat at the piano bench, unable to move. He'd given everything. There was nothing left. Slowly, painfully, he stood and turned to face the audience. The sight before him was surreal. 600 of America's wealthiest, most powerful people on their feet, applauding him. The dishwasher, the homeless man, the nobody. Except he wasn't a nobody anymore. He was a musician. That's what he'd always been, what the fire couldn't take, what 10 years of survival couldn't erase. The applause continued for what felt like forever. DeShawn stood there overwhelmed, not knowing what to do with his hands, with his body, with this moment that was so far beyond anything he'd imagined. Finally, the applause began to fade. People started to sit down. But then the man who'd been first to applaud, the one who'd walked down the center aisle, stepped onto the stage. He was in his 60s, distinguished looking in an immaculate tuxedo. His face was familiar, though DeShawn couldn't place it. The man approached DeShawn and did something unexpected. He embraced him. "Young man," he said, his voice choked with emotion that was extraordinary. "I've been attending concerts for 40 years. I've heard the greatest pianists in the world. And what you just did, what you just gave us, that was among the finest performances I've ever witnessed." "Thank you," DeShawn managed, still stunned. The man pulled back his hands on DeShawn's shoulders. "Do you know who I am?" DeShawn shook his head. "My name is Maestro Julian Wright. I'm the music director of the New York Philharmonic, and I'm also one of the judges who awards the Levinson Fellowship a full scholarship to any conservatory in the country, plus a performance position with one of 3 major orchestras." DeShawn's heart stopped. The Levinson Fellowship was legendary, full ride to any music school, a guaranteed position in a major orchestra. It was one of the most prestigious awards in classical music, given to only one person per year. "I came to this gala tonight as a favor to Victoria Maestro Wright," continued. "I was expecting a boring evening of mediocre entertainment and wealthy people pretending to care about charity. I was not expecting to discover one of the most gifted pianists I've heard in a generation." The ballroom had gone completely silent again. Everyone was listening. "You said your name is DeShawn Rivers?" "Yes, sir." "DeShawn Rivers from Detroit?" "Yes." Maestro Wright's eyes widened. "My God, I remember you. 15 years ago, there was an article in Musical America magazine. The prodigy from Detroit. A young boy who'd won every competition, who'd gotten a full scholarship to Juilliard. And then you disappeared. Everyone in the classical music world wondered what happened to you." There was a fire, DeShawn said quietly. I lost my parents, lost everything, and yet here you stand, playing like a master. Maestro Wright turned to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do something I've never done before. The Levinson Fellowship application process usually takes months, auditions, interviews, extensive vetting, but I'm one of 3 judges who have to agree. And I'm going to spend the next week convincing my colleagues that we need to award this year's fellowship to this man right here, right now. A murmur went through the crowd. Mr. Rivers' Maestro Wright turned back to DeShawn. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a position with the New York Philharmonic. We'll start with you as a featured soloist for our spring season. Full salary benefits the works. And I'll personally sponsor your application to return to Juilliard to complete your education. DeShawn couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. I have a sister. She's sick. She needs surgery. How much? $60,000. Maestro Wright didn't hesitate. I'll personally see to it that she gets the surgery. Consider it an advance on your first year's salary. DeShawn's legs gave out. He would have fallen if Maestro Wright hadn't caught him. The audience erupted again, applauding not just the performance now, but this moment, this transformation, this impossible fairy tale happening right in front of them. Through his tears, DeShawn saw Victoria Ashford still standing at her table. Her face had gone from pale to red. She looked furious. This was supposed to be her charity event, her moment to shine. And instead she'd been completely overshadowed. But DeShawn didn't care about Victoria anymore. Didn't care about her cruelty or her games. All he cared about was that Zara was going to live, his sister was going to live, and maybe just maybe he'd found his way back to life too. As Maestro Wright helped DeShawn off the stage, the ballroom erupted into chaos. People were standing trying to get closer, trying to speak to DeShawn. Phones were out now, taking pictures, recording videos. The story was already going viral. Victoria tried to intercept them, her public smile plastered on. Maestro Wright, how wonderful. This is exactly why I brought DeShawn here tonight. To give talented people opportunities, save it. Victoria Maestro, Wright said coldly. I heard how you introduced him. Our dishwasher. You were trying to humiliate him. Well, congratulations. You just humiliated yourself instead. Victoria's smile faltered. Everyone in this room now knows that you had one of the greatest pianists of his generation washing dishes in your hotel, that you treated him like garbage, that you used him as a prop for your ego. Maestro Wright shook his head. You should be ashamed. He guided DeShawn away, leaving Victoria standing alone, her face burning. In the crowd, people were already whispering. The story was shifting. Victoria Ashford, who'd tried to present herself as a charitable philanthropist, had actually been exposed as cruel and exploitative. Maestro Wright led DeShawn to a quiet corner away from the crowd. Are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Your hand looks swollen. It's an old injury from the fire. It'll be okay. We'll get you to a doctor anyway. But first, I need to ask you something serious. That offer I made, I meant every word. But DeShawn, I need to know, is this what you want? After everything you've been through, after 10 years of survival, is music still what you want? DeShawn looked at his damaged hand, at the scars that would never fully heal, at the swelling from pushing himself too hard tonight. Then he thought about how it had felt to play again. Really play. Not sneaking around in an abandoned church, but performing for an audience. Sharing his gift with the world. Yes, he said. It's what I've always wanted. I just forgot for a while. Maestro Wright smiled. Then we'll make it happen. It won't be easy. You'll have to work harder than you've ever worked. You'll have to rebuild technique, relearn things. Your hand will need physical therapy. It's going to be a long road." "I'm used to long roads," DeShawn said. "I know you are." Maestro Wright pulled out a business card. "This is my personal number. Call me tomorrow. We'll start making arrangements. Housing, medical care for you and your sister, everything you need." DeShawn took the card, his hands shaking. He looked at it, at the embossed letters, at proof that this was real. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just keep playing. The world needs to hear your gift." As they talked, hotel staff approached. "Mr. Rivers, there are several reporters asking to speak with you, and some of the guests would like to meet you." DeShawn looked at Maestro Wright, uncertain. "Up to you," the maestro said. "But if I were you, I'd go find your sister first. Tell her the news. Everything else can wait." DeShawn nodded. That's exactly what he wanted to do. Needed to do. He started making his way toward the exit, but Victoria appeared, blocking his path. She looked different now. The confidence had cracked. Her hands were shaking. "DeShawn," she said. "About the money. Our arrangement?" "Keep it," DeShawn said. "What the 20,000? Keep it. I don't want anything from you." Victoria's expression flickered between relief and fury. "You can't just—" "I can. And I am." DeShawn looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not hatred. Pity. "You know what the difference is between us," he said quietly. "I lost everything, and I'm still standing. You have everything and you're still empty. You tried to use me to make yourself look good, but all you did was show everyone who you really are." He walked past her, leaving her standing alone in her expensive gown, in her beautiful ballroom, surrounded by people who were already posting about her cruelty on social media. DeShawn Rivers of the Homeless Pianist was about to become an internet sensation. But Victoria Ashford's carefully crafted reputation was about to crumble. 6 months later, DeShawn stood backstage at Lincoln Center adjusting his tuxedo. A real tuxedo, this time properly fitted, expensive. He could barely believe he was wearing it. Through the curtains, he could hear the audience taking their seats. 2,000 people here to see the New York Philharmonic's spring concert. And him, featured soloist. His phone buzzed. A text from Zara. "I'm in the front row. I can't believe I'm actually here. Mom and Dad would be so proud." DeShawn smiled. Tears threatening. Zara had had her surgery 3 months ago. It had been successful. She was healthy now, growing stronger every day. She'd moved into the apartment Maestro Wright had helped DeShawn secure. And for the first time since the fire, they were living together again. A family. Another text came through. This one from Father Thomas. Watching the live stream at the church. Playing for you and your mother right now. Break a leg, my son. The church. Father Thomas had cleaned it up with DeShawn's help. They'd fixed the old piano, or rather DeShawn had bought a new one and donated it to the church. Now it was used for free community music lessons, just like the ones that had started DeShawn's journey 30 years ago. A knock at the dressing room door. Maestro Wright entered. Ready. Nervous. DeShawn admitted. Good. Use it. Maestro Wright squeezed his shoulder. You've been working so hard these past months. Tonight just play. Don't think about technique or perfection. Just feel the music. They walked to the stage entrance together. The orchestra was already in place, warming up. By the way, Maestro Wright said there's someone here tonight I think you'll want to know about. Who Victoria Ashford? DeShawn stopped. What? Why, she bought a ticket. Front row. I suspect she wants to see what she missed out on." Maestro Wright's expression was grim. "Her hotel chain collapsed, you know. The scandal from that night went viral. Turns out when you build a reputation on false charity and exploit vulnerable people, eventually, it catches up with you. She's being investigated for labor violations, lost most of her fortune in lawsuits. DeShawn should have felt satisfaction, vindication, but he just felt tired. 'I don't want to play for her,' he said. 'I don't want her in my head.' Then don't play for her. Play for the people who matter. Play for your mother, for Zara, for yourself. She's irrelevant now." The stage manager signaled. It was time. DeShawn walked onto the stage into the bright lights, and the audience applauded. He sat at the Steinway Grand, this one even more beautiful than the one at Victoria's Gala. He looked out at the audience, found Zara in the front row beaming at him, healthy and alive and there. And yes, 3 seats over, he saw Victoria Ashford. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her designer gown couldn't hide the defeat in her posture. Their eyes met for just a moment. He saw regret there, maybe even shame. DeShawn looked away. She didn't matter anymore. He positioned his hands over the keys and nodded to Maestro Wright, who raised his baton. The orchestra began the opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. And DeShawn Rivers, once homeless, once broken, once lost, began to play. But this time, he wasn't playing to survive. He wasn't playing to prove anything. He wasn't playing for money or approval or redemption. He was just playing because he was a musician, and this is what musicians do. They create beauty from pain. They turn suffering into art. They take everything life throws at them and transform it into something worth hearing. As the music soared through Lincoln Center, as 2,000 people sat transfixed, as Zara cried tears of joy in the front row, as Father Thomas watched from an old church and smiled as social media exploded with videos and stories about the comeback of Detroit's prodigy, DeShawn Rivers, thought about his mother. "Mama," he whispered between phrases. "I made it back. I found my way home." The music answered for her the way it always had, and somewhere in whatever place souls go after this life, Clara Rivers smiled and told her husband, "That's our boy. That's our beautiful boy." The fire had taken everything, but it hadn't taken the music. And in the end, the music was all that mattered.